Okay, so we've finished up epithelial tissue and connective tissue. So we only got two left, and these are not nearly as long as those are. So muscle tissue is next. So what is muscle tissue? Well, muscle consists of three types of tissue: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle. Muscle is highly vascularized, as you might expect, because muscle needs lots of energy, needs lots of oxygen, needs lots of sugar to make ATP. Has lots of innervations, has lots of nerve attachments that control the muscle tissue. Muscle cells, they're elongated. There's long cells. And a little unfortunate terminology, but they are called fibers. Okay? So a long muscle cell is called a fiber. It shortens, it contracts when it's stimulated. So it contracts and that moves, that causes you to be able to move. So, or moves stuff along your small intestine, for instance, or your heart contracts and it moves blood through your body. So muscle cells are these or muscle fibers contract in response to innervation, and they have lots of blood vessels around them. So the three types: skeletal muscle, they are large, they have multinucleate cells, cylindrical, they can be 10 to 12 centimeters long, and they're attached to bones and also skin. Cardiac muscle is they're smaller branching fibers, and they have one or two centrally located nuclei. The big distinction that you can tell between cardiac and skeletal muscle is there's beyond not just the branching, but also there's something called an intercalated discs. And those are dark bands that are perpendicular to the way the fibers are going. So you have a fiber and you have an intercalated disc, and you have another fiber start on the other side. So it's where cardiac cells meet and communicate and connect end to end. You only find intercalated discs in cardiac muscle. Then you have smooth muscle, and those are small cells. They're spindle-shaped, which means it's tapered at both ends. Spindle is they used to wind thread around these, and so it would form. There's a small pole, and it would form a wind of thread around them, so you'd have the spindle. So this is what spindle shape is. And these are found on the walls of the esophagus, the stomach, intestines, urinary bladder, blood vessels, pupils, all those kind of places. Okay, and we'll talk about, we're not going to talk about muscle in the AP1 here. You'll talk about it in AP2. So, but smooth and cardiac muscle are not under voluntary control. Skeletal muscle is under voluntary control. So you can move skeletal muscle. Cardiac muscle and smooth muscle just move in a sense by themselves. Your brain controls them, but they and other nerve plexuses control them, control the movements of those, contractions of those. Okay, next slide. Okay, so here's a skeletal muscle cell or muscle fiber, and you see it shows the nucleus. It also has these distinct bands across it. Those are called striations. So each of these bands is very visible, very obvious underneath the microscope. Okay, next slide. So here's several of them. Here's nerve innervations. You can see the nerves. There's blood vessels all around, and here's the nucleus of the skeletal muscle cell, and you have the striations once again. So you have these muscle fibers all next to each other, all running parallel in the same direction, so that you can take your arm, and I can pull it towards myself because all those muscle fibers are all pulling this arm in the same direction. If they were different directions, it wouldn't work nearly as well. So next slide. So here under the microscope, here's what muscle looks like, muscle cells. So this is the width of the fiber here. Okay, there's one fiber. Here's one fiber. Here's another fiber. Here's part of another one. And here's part of another one. Okay, and each fiber is a single cell. So here's your nucleus. Here's a nucleus here. These are multinucleate, so we have multiple nuclei running around in these guys, right? So here's another solid, easy to identify nucleus. Here's a nucleus here, here's another one here, here's another one here. Okay? And then you have these striations, all these these stripes all the way across. So that makes it, I can't draw, sorry. I can't draw straight on this little pad especially. So, all right. So there's your striations going across the muscle fibers. Those are due to the muscle proteins that are inside the proteins that are inside the muscle fiber. They make this there's a regular arrangement of those. All right, next slide. This is a picture from your guys' book. It's a little different stain. So you have, or a different look at it. It's not as reddish as the other one was. So, but you still see a whole bunch of, whole bunch of nuclei, right, in the cell, right. And then striations, you can see those going across here, right, stripes, all the tiger stripes. And then this is a single skeletal muscle fiber here. So that'd be one. So that fiber represents one cell with multiple nuclei. All right, next slide. Okay, going on to cardiac muscle. So this is a heart, actually sitting here being perfused, sitting in a little tray here. And so next slide. So we have cardiac muscle. And so this is, so here's a width, drawn on the outside here, width of a cardiac muscle fiber. And you can see there's nuclei in here. Here's an intercalated disc. Here's an intercalated disc. Here's another one. Here's another one. I'm just circling these things so you see them all. Here's another one here. Here's another one here. And then you have striations, but they're not quite as pronounced as they are in the skeletal muscle, right? But you can still see these striations. And you can see the nuclei. You can see, but the biggest thing that distinguishes cardiac muscle from skeletal muscle are these intercalated discs. Like there's one right there. Okay, so those intercalated discs really distinguish cardiac from skeletal muscle. Also, the other thing that happens is here's a fiber here, and here's a branch of the fiber here, right? So this is a branch point going across here. And why would these? So here's the fiber coming along here. And then here's a fiber coming along here, roughly, approximately, right? And then it branches. And so you see branching. Here's a fiber here. Here's a branch point there. So you start seeing branching of these fibers. So why would fibers need to branch? Well, the heart isn't straight. You have some straight fibers, but the fibers need to like wrap around a little bit. So you got to branch a little bit. It's because you're going to squeeze together like this. You're not pulling one way like you would with a skeletal muscle. You're squeezing. So you got to have these fibers have got to go a little bit different directions and wrap around the ventricles. All right, next slide. So this is showing the branching, the striations in the cardiac muscle. This is cardiac muscle. The intercalated discs, you can see them right there. Sorry, right there, right there, right here. These black lines, okay? And here's a nucleus, and here's a nucleus here of the cardiac muscle cells. And you can see the branching, how these fibers branch. Very different from skeletal muscle. Next slide. Here's a cardiac muscle tissue under the microscope again, and you can see intercalated disc here, and here, and here, 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 okay? And you can see the striations. They're faint, but the striations going north-south here, like that. And let's see. It's hard to see good branching on this slide. But anyway, so there's the main things that you see on there. So you see the intercalated discs, intercalated discs. I spell it with a K, so a lot of times. So I pop back and forth between C and K. So usually I do it with a K, but anyway. So intercalated discs are one of the major distinguishing features of cardiac muscle. Next slide. Okay, so we did skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle. Now let's do smooth muscle. So smooth muscle, you find it around like the intestines, around ureters, because you actually squeeze the ureter to help get the urine out. So here's, we talked about the urinary bladder, and you notice the transitional epithelium here. This is transitional because it goes from cuboidal to squamous. As urine goes down there, it can expand out and come back together. And then, so here's the lumen. So there's space on one side, so that's how you know it's epithelium. So there's your lumen, this transitional epithelium there. And then we have smooth muscle layers. So there's a couple layers of it there. And then there's connective tissue all around the outside. So this is all smooth muscle here and here. Okay? And so, and why is it different colors? Well, some of the muscle goes, or like you have a tube, some of it goes around the tube, and some of it goes along the tube. Okay, so you have longitudinal smooth muscle, and then you have circular or bands of smooth muscle going around the tube. So that means you can squeeze, the circular smooth muscle can squeeze stuff down the tube, and then the longitudinal muscle can shorten the tube if it needs to help squeeze stuff out. All right, next slide. It happens the same thing in the small intestine and large intestine as well. Okay, so here's smooth muscle fibers in cross section. This is the smooth muscle part down here. All right. So, and you can, I'll see if I can find a good one here. Here's a good spindle fiber here. Okay, you can see the pointy end here on this end right there. Okay, so you can see that cell goes, it gets fat where the nucleus is, and it goes and it's long and has this long pointy end. And on both sides, so they're spindle shaped. So now you can kind of see a little bit better if you start looking at these. And so here's a long one. It goes all the way here, all the way across, and then over that way. And it comes across like there. And here's another one. You can see the spindle shape on this one as well. So if you look inside there, cut off part of it, I think. So, but anyway, you can see the spindle shape of all of these cells. So that's what smooth muscle looks like. All right, next slide. So here's the nucleus of a smooth muscle fiber, showing the thin ends and the fat middle, spindle shaped. Next slide. So this is a picture of your guys' book. I think this is a very unfortunate picture because it looks a lot like a dense regular connective tissue. I wish they had a better picture in your book. I thought this was a very poor picture. They could have easily showed something better, like that picture I showed you a little bit ago. So anyway, but these are smooth muscle cells. And you can tell it's not dense regular connective tissue because these nuclei are much closer together. There's a lot more of them in dense connective tissue versus smooth muscle tissue. In the connective tissue, the cells that are in connective tissue, they make a lot of collagen fibers. There's a lot of space between the cells, so there's very few cells. Here you've got a lot more cells. Smooth muscle is made up of all cells, so that's why you have a lot of nuclei. So that's how you can tell the difference. But I would prefer they would show a slide that had actually spindle-shaped cells in there, and you could actually see it. So that would be much nicer. Anyway, next slide. Okay, yeah, my little rant on the last slide. Sorry about that. So we have skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. Skeletal muscle attaches to bones and skin. Cardiac muscle is found in the heart, as you expect. Smooth muscle is found in the walls of digestive tract, walls of arteries and veins, walls of the ureters, urinary bladder and urethra, and also in the muscles of the eye, so you can contract the pupil, okay, and relax and open the pupil up so you can see in the dark better. Okay, so smooth muscle is not as involuntary as is cardiac muscle. So those are both involuntary. Oops. And this skeletal muscle is voluntary. So you can control it. You have nerves going down there that go to parts of your brain that are conscious to you, and you control it. Cardiac muscle and smooth muscle are controlled by parts of the brain that you're not aware of. All right. And we'll talk about that when we get to the nervous system. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we've done the 3 primary tissues. We're on to the 4th. So we've done epithelial tissue, connective tissue, and muscle tissue. Now we're at nervous tissue. This is the last part, and this is actually very short. So we're going to talk a lot about nervous tissue when we talk about the brain and spinal cord and all that. So we have 3 whole lectures on that, so, or 3 classes on that. Anyway, so what is nervous tissue? Well, nervous tissue forms the brain, spinal cord, and nerves. It's highly cellular. There's lots of cells that make up the brain, the spinal cord, and nerves. And the 2 types of cells that are found in the nervous tissue are neurons and neuroglia. Sometimes you'll hear them referred to as glial cells. So you'll have glial, but they're really called neuroglial or neuroglia or neuroglial cells. Neurons are they're kind of the star show. They're the big important ones. They send and receive information. They are electrical and chemical signals is how they send and receive information. They have processes, which are cellular extensions. They reach out and touch other cells. Those extensions are called dendrites that receive or send information as nerve impulses from sensory receptors or other neurons. Then they have one axon that is a process that sends signals to other neurons or muscles or glands. So a neuron communicates with another neuron. It communicates with a muscle or a gland. Neurons can have lots of dendrites, but only one axon. The main part of the cell where the nucleus is located is called the cell body or neuronal body or soma. It's not on here, so you'll see that word later on. Soma is also the cell body. And these are long cells. They can actually go, like there's a cell that will go from your spinal cord all the way down to your feet, so all the way down to your toes. So because you can feel with your toes, because when you kick something it hurts. So, and there's one cell that carries that signal all the way from there all the way up to your spinal cord. So then there's another cell that takes you from the spinal cord up to the brain, but we'll get into that later on. Anyway, soma equals cell body, or actually neuron cell body. Okay. And neuroglia, those are all supporting cells. They support the neurons and they help them function in various ways. So there's 2 main types of cells, the neurons and the neuroglial cells. Next slide. So here's, in white here, this is a neuron. Okay. It's a neuron cell. And we have dendrites here coming from there's another neuron over here. So I shouldn't draw it that way. Let's draw this again. So there's another neuron that's over here that's like, it's sending out dendrites from it. Sorry, I'm doing a lot of drawing here, and then has an axon that's coming off here, there. So this is a neuron over here, and it's so this neuron here, that's a neuron cell. There's a neuron cell, and these 2 guys are communicating. So this is talking to this neuron cell. And here's another neuron cell down here as well. So, and this is another neuron cell down here as well. Okay, and then you have this part down here is the axon, and then here is a neuroglial cell. Okay, so here's another neuroglial cell here. We'll talk about all of there's different types of these. There's 6 different types of neuroglial cells, but we'll talk about those later on. Here's another neuroglial cell here, right? So that just gives you an idea of like how these things are put together. You have neuron cells and you have neuroglial cells all around them helping them out. So, okay, next slide. That's what makes up nervous tissue. So here's an actual photomicrograph of a neuron, multipolar neuron. So we have, let's see, this process here. This is an axon here. These are Those are all dendrites coming off the neuron. We're going to learn all this stuff. You don't have to know these names. I just wanted to point out that these are the parts of the neuron. And here's the cell body here, okay, of the neuron. And then all these little dots here, these are neuroglial cells, okay. And they make things for the neurons. They make some extracellular matrix. They make they wrap around parts of the neurons. They touch the neurons. They create the environment that helps keep the neurons happy. So you have neurons and neuroglial cells in nervous tissue. Next slide. So here's another picture of a neuron here. Okay, so and here's dendrites, and here's an axon. This is the axon down here. These are dendrites here, and the cell body there. Okay, next slide. Here's another picture of nervous tissue, so showing the neuroglial cells, axon, the cell body of the neuron, showing the nucleus. This is all extracellular matrix. You have dendrites hanging off of the neuron cell. So just showing you different pictures of what nervous tissue looks like. It has neurons in it. It has neuroglial cells. Okay, next slide. Okay, all right, we're done with tissues. Thank goodness. Yeah, I know it's a lot of stuff to go over. It's a lot of stuff to remember, but we've done the primary tissues, the 4 categories: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. So there you are, the 4 primary categories of tissues. So just review those, and we'll have pictures on the test that you get to identify, and then we'll talk about the skeletal system next time. That'll be our the next section will be intro to skeletal system, then the axial skeleton, which is the head and the skull and the vertebral column and rib cage, and then we'll talk about the appendicular skeleton, which is the arms and legs, the week after that. So that'll be the next 3 weeks. So, all right, y'all take care. See you next week. Bye.